From Southern California, this is The Circle of Insight, a show about everything in psychology. Hear the latest in news and views on psychology. Our motto is simple: wherever there is psychology involved, we are there. And now, here's your host of The Circle of Insight, Carlos Vasquez.
Hi everyone, my name is Carlos Vasquez. I am a doctoral candidate in psychology and the host of The Circle of Insight, where we discuss topics that you have chosen with leading experts. Our motto is simple: wherever there's psychology involved, we are there. Today we're going to continue our conversation in part 2 with Dr. Melanie Bacon, campus director of the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, also a Jungian psychotherapist. Today we're going to tackle, do we need religion? Does religion control us? And what is the role of symbols? What are the roles of symbols in religion? Welcome back, Dr. Bacon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being on the show.
Absolutely.
So last time we talked a lot about why we have religion.
Right.
We found out a lot of the purposes why we need it.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, not why we need it, but why we have it. Where
Yeah.
people look for a transcendent being.
Right.
Because it's bigger than ourselves
Yes.
to handle these problems that we have. The question now, I guess, for you is, do we need it? Do we need religion?
Well, we need some kind of a practice. And I think the best example is the 12-step movement, the AA movement in particular. And a lot of people don't know that Carl Jung met with Bill W. and Dr. Bob when they were kind of trying to get the AA movement started and exhorted them to bring in the spiritual component. He truly believed, in his having worked for many years at that time in the field of psychoanalysis, that the use of drugs and alcohol was really an aspect of wanting to get in touch with a transcendent experience. That
Use of alcohol and drugs.
In fact, another word for alcohol is spirits. And so he felt
That's
that
right.
wasn't really a coincidence. It's almost a perversion of a initiatory experience. If in a lot of traditions there's initiation that you have to go through to move through different levels of experience of the divine. Drugs and alcohol take you, and along the way an initiatory experience often has some pain involved. You give things up and you fast, but it's regulated, and there's a specific order, and you often have an accompanying director to help you go through the different stages. So alcohol and drugs turn that on its head. They give you the transcendent experience up front, and then everything else is pain going down. So instead of moving you up from earthly experience to heavenly, it takes you from a so-called heavenly experience down into hell. And anybody who's worked with addicts, and I have for many years, will tell you that whether you believe there's a Satan or not, if anything was evil, alcohol and drugs will destroy everything anybody ever loved.
That's ironic. I'm assuming initially that when they go to the drugs or alcohol to get to this transcendent state, they're trying to avoid pain.
They are.
And seek pleasure, and obviously it backfires on them.
Very much so.
That's fascinating.
So the AA movement starts with besides the first step, that you're powerless over your addiction, but it moves you toward the higher power, acceptance of a higher power as you understand, or God of your understanding. It's really was very careful not to insist on any religious tradition. And then all of the 12 steps are very spiritually oriented in terms of assisting people in getting to a connection with their own spirituality outside of using drugs and alcohol. And they tried to do AA in the former USSR without any higher power involved, and it was a complete failure. And most people that try to overcome an addiction without some idea of higher power, however ill-defined it is, find it really impossible to stop. And my understanding is that you need to replace whatever that drug was doing with something else. Otherwise, there's a vacuum.
And we talked about it earlier. You say Jung believes everybody has
that it's a natural human need for transcendence. So what you can see is that people will take that energy and put it into, if they don't have a religious tradition or a spiritual tradition of some type, they will put it into politics. Politics can be a religious experience for some people. In other words, there's evil people, the other side, people who disagree with you. You're good, everything you want is good. You can get very defined that way. People can really argue from that position with religious fervor. They don't understand that what they're doing is essentially living out a religious tradition within a secular context.
You took us right into our next question. People have used religion to control other people.
Yes. And this is what our founding fathers really wanted us to avoid, because they had experienced that. And prior to that, people that came to this country before we were a country were coming to get away from governmental religious proscriptions and try to have their own freedom of religion. And that's one of the tenets of our country. We're one of the few countries that doesn't have a state religion. Even those that are very secular, Italy and France, were at one time heavily Catholic, and have some vestiges of that even in their political system. And so for many years and centuries, really, in the Western culture, there was very little difference between the secular government and the religious system of, the Catholic tradition. And they were intermingled completely. In fact, at one point, you had the Pope, the Holy Roman Empire was running everything, and the king was being appointed by the Pope. But what that did is, in some ways, there was a benefit in that everyone had the same ideas about religion, pretty much. And there was a common assumption about the world and a common worldview, however you would describe it now. What we have in the postmodern era is a complete lack of that. And we don't have a common worldview. And as a consequence, people are left with kind of aimlessly floating around as unrelated individuals, particularly in Western culture, more so. And that has come with its own problems. Jung would say the prevalence of anxiety disorders and depression and addictions is a direct result of people having thrown God out and any relationship to anything other than themselves as a higher power. In fact, my husband, who's also a marriage and family therapist, and I were speaking the other day, and he works in a treatment center, about how people, what someone's real higher power is when things get difficult.
Yes.
So when things are difficult, are they trusting in God as they might profess, or are they trusting in their bank account? And if that gets wobbly, they're freaking out. Are they trusting in their doctors more than, you really, it causes people to reveal themselves. So even people that have a professed religious belief system where they consciously will say, here's what I believe, when the rubber meets the road, a lot of times what's really revealed is, well, who you think your higher power is at this point is, your 401k. And, it's a good litmus test for somebody's willingness to walk whatever the walk is of their religious tradition.
What do they say? God's always in the... You can always find God in a manhole?
Yes. Yes, there's no atheists in
manholes.
in war, that's for sure.
Now, we're going to explore a little bit about the same ideas of religion. You made me think about something. Some people have said countries that have the predominant religion per se, maybe 85% of the country believes a certain religion.
Right.
It's almost more of a, how would you say, an anxiety reducer. It reduces tension because you don't have to contemplate that.
That's very true. Yeah, I think there is a part of us that would like to not have to always be responsible for figuring out things. What's the right thing to do in this situation? And so if you are in a culture, and this can be within the United States, my experiences of certain evangelical groups will kind of offer that. It's very clear, here's what you do, X, Y, Z, follow this. And there is a comfort in that. The problem for postmodern Westerners is that usually only goes so far, because we really don't believe that what anybody else tells us is really the ultimate truth. We're really supposed to find our own. That's in our DNA. That wasn't the case in medieval Europe, for example. That wouldn't even be a thought to anybody.
That's a good point.
So we can't even imagine what it's like to really be embedded in a culture that, this leader says this, your religious leader, and you just don't even think twice, that you just follow this along, because at some point in time, in our experience, you'll be saying, well, how do we know that person's right? That's our culture. That's our inheritance as postmodern Westerners. We can't go back to that way of being.
I'm going to detach that component of the evangelical Christian for a second, but it brings me to the question of cults.
Yes.
And it seems like that could lead into that kind of a
very
pattern,
much so.
especially for individuals, I guess, who really need the structure
Yeah.
and don't want any responsibility on deciding where I'm going to end up in life or what do I have
Yes.
to do.
Absolutely.
What's your take on the cults?
It's very infantilizing.
Actually, on both, if you don't mind catching both sides, maybe
Right.
the cult leader as well
Right.
as the crowd. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you look at the person who's attracted to that, yes, they want structure, they want community. You're inside, you're usually in a special community, which has its own kind of egotistical gratification, because everybody else is wrong and we're the only ones that have the truth. And there's very strict adherence to certain behaviors. Oftentimes, if you're really in a cult where there's one leader that's predominant, that person is dictating who's going to marry and who's, everything in your life. Much like when you were 5 or 6 and your parents said, oh, it's time to get up and it's time to go to bed and here's what you're going to wear and, that kind of thing. And so for a while it feels relieving, because you don't have those responsibilities. And at the same time, you don't have to have the burden of trying to figure out things either. Usually people don't stay very long in that tradition, because they start itching and they start to have thoughts that are outside of what that leader would allow.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
Isn't human nature to have that kind of desire to be free and to be independent?
It's hard to say if it's human nature, because it's such a postmodern assumption. That's, it certainly is in our human nature now.
That's a good point.
And then on the other side, you've got someone who will, create a cult, so to speak. Often they start out within a more traditional religious tradition, and then they start to become more and more kind of fanatical. They're usually very charismatic. They have all the answers in their mind, And that in turn attracts people who want someone that has them.
It almost
And so
sounds
it's an
sociopathic.
interplay. Yes. There's a sociopathy about it. There's a delusional quality usually. I mean, I think, for like, let's take David Koresh.
I was thinking, David Koresh, Jim Jones.
I think David Koresh truly believed. So I wouldn't put him as a sociopath, because a sociopath is only using people. They don't have any beliefs in anything except themselves. But I think he really believed this stuff. So there was more of a delusional quality for him. Then there are those that it seems to me more sociopathic. In other words, they don't live the life that they expect their followers to live. The followers are living lives of poverty and working all the time, and the founder of the cult is, on a yacht and has 50 Rolls Royces and 20, mansions. And so that's where you start to think, okay, and they justify, I'm the leader of this religion and I should glorify God with my worldly goods. But one has to just assume that this is a very different kind of person than a David Koresh who truly believed in his theological assumptions, even though one from the outside might say, wow, that's really off the beam. So the fine line is, at what point does, a religion become a cult? Because there are traditional religions who will say, well, you are now no longer believe these tenets, you're not really part of our religion, so you're not in our religion anymore. That's a pretty common experience. How one would define a cult is usually some kind of unwillingness to accept any ideas outside of a very narrow range. Whereas the more traditional religions tend to have if you look at Catholicism, a huge variety of theologies under the umbrella that over the centuries, and practices across cultures that still are included in the Catholic Church. Same with Protestantism. Muslims have their mystical branch of their religion. So, there's a little bit more acceptance of diversity of thought. Again, generally speaking, I mean, you can have groups that don't accept any.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that.
Yeah.
Great topic. We'll have to have you back for that one in the future. Now we're going to head over to the role of symbols. We know Jung was huge on symbols.
Right.
And how does a symbol work in religion? What role do they play?
Well, they're a representation of something other than, the actual physical manifestation. In other words, if you have an icon, let's say, the Eastern Orthodox Christians have icons. So they're pictures of like 3 angels sitting around a chair, and the child of Jesus is in the middle. What that is doing is symbolizing something important about their theology, the theology of that religion, which is, Christ as the child is preeminent even as a baby, and so there'll usually be lots of things in that icon that represent very specific theology. You'll find that in stained glass windows in churches, particularly medieval churches. One of the most famous, besides the cross, which is a symbol of Christianity, is the rose window, which is found a lot of Catholic churches. And that's it's a mandala, which is also found in other religions. So that is a very sacred symbol because it's eternal, it's a circle, it holds things, within its being, and yet it never ends. You can never find a beginning or end of a circle.
A circle's been on a lot of different religions.
Yes.
And usually it's infinity,
Yes.
I think it was.
Infinity. And I actually have done practices with groups where we'll draw a circle, and they'll actually contemplate it and then put images inside the circle and then we talk about that, what it might have meant to them and symbolized. So symbols are very important. Of course, in our secular culture, the Nike symbol, I mean, if you see it, you already know it's Nike, you know their motto. Obviously, it's not going to have the religious experience for most people anyway, but what Jung thought was that symbols come out of our unconscious, that you can't necessarily make one up. You might make one up, but it still came out of your imagination. And those that survive over time and become living, there's a living reality about that symbol that is meaningful. So the cross is an example. When people see that, who are in that religious tradition, and even who aren't, it has a big charge emotionally, to the point where those who are atheistic want to get rid of it off of, the cemeteries and that are public property. It's interesting that a stick, and another one going like this would cause multiple legal battles by people that have no professed belief in that symbol. There's an emotional charge to that beyond just factual, well, we just don't want a cross on public property. That's exactly what Jung would say. There's a complex involved. It's an archetype, which is the cross and the archetype of Christ, but the complex is all this. So that's the nucleus of an atom, let's say, and around the nucleus of an atom is lots of energy, and a complex is that. So there could be good energy, negative, anger, and when you touch on it, you get a nuclear reaction. So for some people who are very anti-religion, that's a complex. If they truly didn't believe in this stuff, like I don't believe, if I wear a Nike swoosh, I'm going to, run like the wind. It doesn't bother me that everybody's wearing Nike swooshes. I don't really care because I don't believe in it. It doesn't bother me. But I don't have any energy about it. I think that what people reveal when they get that upset over a religious symbol that they profess not to believe in, that there's something else going on there that they haven't really dealt with.
That's fascinating. The symbols do have a lot of power. I remember
Yeah.
there was a study, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the study, with the 10 Commandments on the wall.
Uh-huh.
And they had one control group and another group, and they were looking for, I can't remember exactly what it was, but the one group that did have the 10 Commandments cheated considerably less than the other group that didn't.
Yeah.
And it was a random group, so we don't know if they were Christians or not Christians, whatever.
Right.
And it was really fascinating just having the 10 Commandments in the wall.
Yes.
Or on the wall, stopped them from doing something that they shouldn't have done.
Exactly.
Created some more value.
Yeah, it was a surprising outcome for them because it was just sitting there on the wall. Nobody went over it with them and told them to read them all and that type of thing.
And I know you brought up the atheists a little bit, and I don't want to get too much into that, but I know there's a lot of people who do think if you put this whole recipe together, we got religion. It gives us a guideline of what we need to do to get to where we want to go. Mm-hmm. It gives us symbols that are charged with power. Mm-hmm. These are really strong things to control people, in a sense.
Right.
Whether good or bad.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, and so, again, to look at how people exhibit their need for some larger cause, something bigger than them, it can come out even in an atheistic person in their cause to eradicate, religion from public life. That's a religious expression that's not in a traditional religious context. But Jung would say that that's their psyche's way of getting that need met, of being involved in something larger than themselves.
Now, I want to bring it back because I don't want to make this a knock on religion by any means. But what I want to discuss is, you said that the cross, for instance, we'll use the cross.
Yeah.
Some of these symbols can have charging effects, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're like an atom.
Yes.
The atheists maybe have a negative charge.
Right.
And what kind of positive charges does it have on people who do believe, let's say, in Christ or Christianity? They see the cross. Does that give them comfort? Does that give them security?
I think it would depend on. I think what it would do is remind them that they're not the sum total of the universe. In other words, there is a larger power out there that we can relate to and have a relationship with, even as we don't fully understand, the divine. I think the book of Job in the Bible is really the best example of that. I mean, Job was a righteous man according to the Bible, and he still suffered. And essentially what God says at the end of that story is, hey, I'm a mystery. You're not going to get me. I created the world and everything in it. And unless you've done the same thing, you really don't have the right to question what I'm doing. And I think that, again, from an American point of view, that really goes countercultural because we're raised to question everything. We don't go along with authority, which has been to a benefit of our countries for 200 years. The GIs in World War II, landing on D-Day benefited from not questioning authority by just deciding they were going to figure out what to do. And the Germans, who were a little more authoritarian, were going to stay in their post no matter what. And so, we've benefited, but at the same time, it comes with a price, which is we are always in a kind of a state of flux and, having to find our own way. So the benefits and the price you pay for that, I think, are inherent. There's no getting around it, though. That's just where we are. And we can't shut down the process. You can't unring a bell. The only way through is to move forward and to at least have an attempt to consciously experience the transcendent in a way that is meaningful to you, and to find that and to search for it until you find it for yourself.
Wow. Tell you, another great hour of learning about religion, why we have it, and do we need it. Thank you so much, Dr. Bagan, for coming out.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Thank you once again for joining us. I think the bottom line is we do need religion. It fills a vacuum that we all have as humans. To learn more about the Circle of Insight, you can go to facebook.com/Circle of Insight. You can also now go to iTunes, where you can download our podcasts on the episodes. When you go to facebook.com/Circle of Insight, please put some comments. Give us some ideas for future shows. You can also look at the daily updates. Our next episode, we're going to be talking about ISIS. Where did ISIS come from? This mysterious fundamentalist group down in the Middle East. Nobody really knows where it came from, but we have a guest that does. So join us for that. Thank you, everyone, again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.